Introduce yourself again.
And it should says record.
Yeah.
Okay,
You're
good.
set.
Well, I'm Jon Roland. I'm founder and president of the Constitution Society. I'm also the Libertarian candidate for Texas Attorney General. The day is October 30th, 2010, and we're gathered here at the Palo Alto Battleground north of Brownsville, Texas. And what I'd like to do right now is to discuss my proposals for nullification, how it would work. On my website at constitution.org, I have extensive materials on the subject. If you click on political reform and then scroll down, you'll see the link to nullification. And then that has a page with other links. But I'd like to summarize it here today. The basic plan is to establish a kind of super grand jury. This would be a state-level grand jury composed of 23 randomly selected citizens, and it would have as its mandate to hear complaints about federal usurpations from Texas citizens. That's all it would do. It's not for to hearing complaints about crimes or other things that are just ordinary stuff. It's just violations of the Constitution by federal officials or agents. Now, I'll leave till later how that panel would be selected. I call it, as a preliminary name, the Federal Action Review Commission. Because it's not just an ordinary grand jury. It would have the powers of a grand jury to subpoena witnesses, to conduct hearings, but when it came time for it to present a report, if it found that some action of a federal official was unconstitutional, then the effect of that finding would be to require all state officials and agents and contractors to refuse to cooperate with that federal action. And it would encourage state citizens to also refuse to cooperate with it. So what he would be doing is putting the entire state in opposition to that action, to that usurpation. In effect, what he would be doing is organizing the entire state to engage in civil disobedience. Now, we've seen other examples of civil disobedience by states, some successful, some not so successful. There have been a number of proposals concerning recent legislation, particularly the Health Care Act. But unfortunately, most of those proposals are ill-conceived. For example, one of them would simply pass a bill in the state legislature, making it a crime for a federal agent to collect an insurance premium. Well, that won't work. There are a lot of reasons why it won't work. I can get into that later. But that is a simplistic approach to a very complex problem. In general, you cannot arrest federal agents for doing their job. The only thing that would happen if you tried to do that is it would be immediately, probably within an hour after the arrest was made, removed to federal court and dismissed, killing the case. And as far as federal agents, IRS agents, enforcing the collection of health care premiums, Congress shot down the most obvious way to deal with that, because it specifically forbade IRS agents to apply liens or levies to anyone to collect the insurance premium. They can't levy, they can't lien. So you might ask, well, is there how they're going to collect an insurance premium if they can't levy and they can't lien? Well, the answer is that if they have your money from some other source, let's say, for example, your employer withholds money and you apply for a refund, they say, oh, this money is for the health insurance premium. And you've already paid it. Oh, and by the way, you owe us about $800, which is about what's expected to be, in unpaid taxes. You're still short. So if you try to sue them to saying it's unconstitutional to, collect his insurance premiums, it says, well, wait a minute. You have to, under the law, you have to pay all of your taxes and penalties and interest before you can sue to get your money back. And by the way, since you failed to pay $800 on your taxes, not your insurance premium, on your taxes, we have imposed.
She'd like to speak pretty soon, and she thinks that it would be good to go ahead and do it over here. Is that okay to go ahead and get going and do that?
It's recorded.
He's speaking.
Oh, good. I didn't know that.
Okay.
Sorry about it.
It was. So the problem is there that now they can add, let's say it started with $800 short, so you can easily run it up to $8,000, even $80,000 in interest and penalties. You've got to pay all of that, plus your attorney's fees, all to get them to refund $800. So they have thought about all these things. The legislation that was proposed by Leo Berman just did not understand what they're up against. And the lawsuit that was filed originally in Florida by McCallum and signed on to by 19 state attorney general also failed to be designed for that problem. The lawsuit was written by a friend of mine who wrote it at a time while the bill was still in the House being debated and before it reached its final form. And they proceeded to try to litigate it as though they were litigating the bill in the House and not the one that got enacted. Well, we just got a decision in Florida. They struck out all but 2 of the claims, and those 2 will probably not survive for some of the reasons I've indicated. If you're going to litigate, and it's certainly worth litigating if you do it right, you have to know what you're doing. And none of these state attorney generals knew what they were doing. And I pointed this out to them. I pointed about to my friend David, who drafted the litigation, and they're kind of in a fog as far as I'm concerned. They have not thought through the legal strategy that it's going to take to really even have a chance of winning in court, much less actually doing so. And there's no real chance of winning in court.
Mr. Roland,
Yeah,
how long have you been an attorney?
I'm not an attorney, I'm a legal historian.
You're a legal historian?
Right. But I do go to court with taking cases. For example, I filed an intervention in Lulac v. Perry on the Texas redistricting case. I was the only one with a proposal for redistricting that was not representative of the interests of one of the other two major parties.
That's important.
Yeah.
Say that again.
Well, it was the proposal, they're getting off track here, but
But that's important.
yeah.
That's important.
The proposal was essentially to let the computers draw the maps with no human intervention, or very little. The computer programs are excellent. Texas has developed the best computer software for the purpose in the country. It's better than any other public software or any private software. You can just turn it loose, it can generate maps. And they're good maps. And everyone is different. So what I propose to do is just let it generate a bunch of maps. And because human beings being what they are, they want to have a hand in it. I'll just give, let's say, generate a couple of hundred of them and let them strike out a few. A couple that are anomalous or really strange looking. And then randomly select from among what's left, and that's the map. So no Democrats drawing maps, no Republicans drawing maps, no attorney generals going to court with the Republican map, which I considered inappropriate.
So it'd be true bipartisan, it would just be...
Well, it was true nonpartisan.
Yeah, nonpartisan.
See, there are two kinds of gerrymandering. There's partisan gerrymandering that tries to get advantage for one party, and there's bipartisan gerrymandering that tries to protect incumbents. My plan does not protect incumbents.
Well, that's aiming.
But is this, are you talking about you're setting up some kind of an organization or a part of the state or something? Is it another layer of government bureaucracy?
No, the legislative council staff have the software. They just run the programs. It's a simple matter to, to set it running. I mean, you can go in yourself, you know what you're doing, reserve time on the computer, in Austin, and draw your own maps. I've done that. So it's certainly doable, and it costs nothing really. Everything's in place. But I discovered in the courtroom when I was discussing this with the other litigants is that, of course, the Republicans wanted their map and the Democrats wanted the issue. They knew they weren't going to get their map. What they wanted was to have an issue that they could use in the next election. Well, as a libertarian, I'm not sympathetic to either view. I think what we need is a truly impartial method of drawing maps if you're going to have single-member districts, and not let it be influenced by either party, by incumbents, by anything. Just a almost purely random process. Well, almost everybody I have discussed this with, including the litigants in that case, agreed with me that I had the statesman-like solution, the only statesman-like solution, and because of who they were representing, they couldn't support it. All right, they say politics is not going to let us adopt a statesman-like solution like yours.
That's why we need to go.
Yes.
Well, that's why we need to support me the next time this comes up, and it will. Because it's going to be the same thing. The legislature is going to draw a map. It's going to favor Republicans. The Democrats are going to sue, just like they have before. It's going to go to court. I'm going to be an intervener, have the same proposal. I don't have to change anything but the dates. And, well, of course, the style, it'll be a different, somebody v. Perry, probably. And, but the Supreme Court itself, Justice Kennedy, asked for a solution like mine. He didn't say so in so many words because he didn't know what he was asking for. But in the Jubileer case, in a footnote, he said, in effect, we need something, and what he was describing is what I was proposing. The problem is getting it to the Supreme Court, and that's going to take money. But if we can take this to the Supreme Court, I think we may be able to end partisan and not bipartisan gerrymandering in this country once and for all. So I have an organization, it's called the Coalition for Nonpartisan Redistricting. And you go to constitution.org, look for selection and removal, and you'll scroll down and you'll see a link to it. Okay.
So what do you want us to do in the end of all this?
Well, go to my website, learn about it, and then help me, because we are now holding hearings on redistricting in various parts of cities in Texas, and I need other people to carry my proposal to the committee, the joint committee. Now, they're not going to accept it, of course, but I want to at least lay the foundation, to cover all the bases.
So we all have jobs.
So we all have jobs. And go to my website, learn about it, then contact me, and I'll be happy to put you to work.
Amen. Good job.
Now,
I'm sorry.
let me get back to nullification.
Sir, can I
Yeah.
ask you a favor? I teach communications.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Some of this is you need to keep it short and sweet, because you're losing your audience.
Well, don't get lost.
Well, no, it's not that. It's not that. It's that sometimes it's dragging on, and so you need to hit us with what you got, and tell us what to do, and we'll be glad to do it.
Okay. Well, the nullification proposal is in the form of a bill to adopt an amendment to the Texas Constitution. And I need people to go to their members of the state legislature to get them to sponsor it. Now, when you do that, you're going to have to be able to explain it to them. So what I'm trying to do now is provide you with the explanation you're going to have to take to them.
No, we're going to have them call you.
That's probably not going to work.
Sure.
No, legislators only want to talk to their own constituents.
Most time they don't want to talk to us either.
Yeah.
Well, they don't want to talk to us, but I mean...
And they don't want to talk to you unless you bring money or votes.
That's right.
So you need to show up in some strength, or have a lot of people write them and phone them and fax them. And you need to all be on the same page, have the same message. So that, and if they ask you questions, you have to be able to answer it. You have to be able to provide the explanations that I'm providing to you now. You can't call on me every time you run into trouble.
But we have a website, right?
We have a website, and if you study it and learn it, that should prepare you. But there's no really good substitute for practicing explaining it to people, speaking to people the way I'm doing it here. So what you need to do is, once you've read all this stuff, is go to groups like this one and try to sell it to them and answer their questions. And they'll have plenty of questions. So that after a while, after you're doing this a while, then you'll be ready for the state legislators. So it's what the Nullification Commission would do is essentially hear complaints about federal usurpations, and I discuss it here in this handout. Mobilize the entire state to resist. But as it turns out, and as I explain here, not all federal usurpations lend themselves to this approach, because not all of them require the cooperation of anyone. There are a lot of things the feds do that they can do without any help from anybody. So a lot of what we're going to be doing in with the Nullification Commission is simply educating the public as to what is and is not constitutional. So it'll inform them when they vote, when they write letters, when they attend rallies, when they do all kinds of things. But ultimately, is to set them up for the next step, which is constitutional amendments. And I discussed that on that link from that website. A lot of people say, well, the Constitution is straightforward, anyone can understand it. We just get back to the Constitution as originally understood, we'll be fine. Well, unfortunately, once the courts in particular and government in general has begun misinterpreting the Constitution, those misinterpretations become entrenched. You can't just suddenly insist on understanding the Constitution the way it was originally meant. Because they're going to say, well, we don't care what it originally meant, we've got this precedent. This is the way we've been doing it now for 50 or 100 years, and we're not going to change. If you want us to change, you've got to amend the Constitution. Not to change it, not to depart from what it originally meant, but just to go back to what it originally meant. The Bill of Rights were clarifying amendments. With the exception of the $20 rule of the 7th Amendment, they did not change anything. Everything in the Bill of Rights is also in the original Constitution, if it's properly understood. But what a difference it makes to restate it in the way the Bill of Rights did. Today, most people don't understand the original Constitution and how it means the same thing as the Bill of Rights. They're constantly having to refer to the Bill of Rights.
At the same time, the Constitution was not going to be ratified without the Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. But it was to clarify what the original Constitution meant. And what we essentially have to do now is to clarify a lot of the other terms of the original Constitution that have since become misinterpreted. Things like, what does regulate mean? What does commerce mean? What does necessary and proper mean? You know, there are all these terms. You know, what is a jury? What is a grand jury? What is due process? These are things that the courts have been allowing people to depart from, case by case by case, and because they don't want to open all these old cases, they say we're only going to go back to the last case. And the last case held this. And yet it might be wrong, but it's better for our decisions to be predictable than to be right.
Mr. Roland, we're getting ready to start up on the speakers over here.
Okay. Well, let's hit the red button here, and you have a chance to read what I've got here.
Yes.
And if you have further questions.
Well, it's great to be here in Brownsville with this group of fine constitutionalists, and I just can't imagine a better way to bring to close this race I've been in for Libertarian candidate for governor of the state of Texas. So thanks for having me here, and I'm just great to be here with a group of like-minded, liberty-loving people. Yes, I'm Kathy Glass, and I want to be your next governor. Now, maybe some of you didn't even know you had another choice in this race other than those two guys who spent $60 million trying to persuade you that the other one is unfit for office. Well, I think they're both right. But why should you vote for me? How would I be any better? Well, I'm the only one in this race that understands our sovereignty, our Texas 10th Amendment sovereignty and our individual sovereignty that's under attack. We're in a battle for America. And the battleground is Texas. But we are not battle ready because we have no effective leadership. Now, this assault on our freedoms is coming at us from two different points, two different kinds. We've got the attack from our southern border due to an insecure border, and we've got this assault from the east, from Washington, D.C., to this avalanche of unconstitutional federal acts. I'm the only one in this race who understands these dual threats, much less have the plan to defeat it, and the will, the guts to do so. Let me go through my...
You need to step ahead in front of the speakers.
Let me go through my 4-point plan, what my campaign is based on. First, secure our border using our own Texas State Guard. Not our National Guard, because that can be nationalized, but our State Guard. You know, under our Texas Constitution, one of the most important duties of the governor is as Commander-in-Chief of the Texas military, which includes the Texas State Guard, the National Guard, and the Air National Guard. So I chose the State Guard because under our Constitution, it is their function to enforce Texas state law and repel invasions, among other things. And that's what we got going on down here at the border. What's going on here is not immigration. It is not. It's a violation of Texas law against trespass and other crimes. And in some respects, it's an invasion. And that's why Rick Perry is derelict in his duty. He's going around trying to give President Obama a letter lecturing the president why he is derelict in his duty. Well, I got a letter and I prepared it to give to Rick Perry. And I had it at our debate, gubernatorial debate, October 19th in Austin, but Rick Perry didn't show up. Now that's something you should consider, because if he won't face up to Kathy Glass, how can he face up to the federal government and those thugs down on the borders? So I still got that letter, but I told him he was in dereliction of his duty as Texas Commander-in-Chief because he did not do what he can do and should do to secure that border using our own Texas State Guard. So that's job one, to get that border under control. Now, second part of my platform is to resist unconstitutional federal acts like Obamacare, using the best tool available, nullification. And that's just one of many things we have to do to restore our 10th Amendment sovereignty, act like a sovereign state, and reclaim our independence. And speaking of independence, part 3 of my platform is get our fiscal house in order so that we can stand strong and independent of Washington financially in all ways. I would cut the budget 50%. That's 1/2. And if that sounds drastic, that's just where we were about 10 or 12 years ago, which shows we can have effective and functioning government at half the price. Also proves how fast government can explode under a supposedly conservative administration. We should end property taxes and enfranchise taxes and eliminate taxpayer-funded services for non-citizens. These are the things we have to do so that we will be prepared for not just what's here right now with our own budget, but what's coming at us because of the financial storm that's sweeping the country and is going to get worse and worse. There's going to be a day when those federal dollars just stop coming, and we need to get ready for that and prepared by standing on our own 2 feet. Another thing, part 4 of my platform is death to the Trans-Texas Corridor and all the toll roads and all of its manifestations. Now, we're told that that's dead, but it's not. Those contracts are sitting on desk. There's funding for it. All the legal mechanisms in place. As soon as we get past this election, that's going through. Not just the I-69 corridor, but I predict the 35 corridor. And that is an assault on our sovereignty. Secret deals with foreign companies to take 500,000 acres of prime Texas land, split our state in two, our country in two. Sold out our sovereignty because we have non-compete clauses in these agreements, that we have agreed that we will not build or even repair a road that would compete with these privately operated toll roads. And I-35 is going to have 5 exits, 5 in the entire state of Texas. So they control when you get on, when you get off, and the monopoly for who you have to deal with while you're on there. That won't happen. So I tell folks, if these are the things you want, a secure border, fiscal sanity, resistance to unconstitutional federal acts and death to the Trans-Texas Corridor, I'm not just another choice you have for governor. I'm your only choice. Oh yeah, Rick Perry may have said some things that sound similar, but 10 years experience has shown us he doesn't mean it, he won't do it. Tell your friends if they're thinking of voting for Rick Perry again, they know they're voting for the man they wish he were and not the man that 10 years experience has shown him to be. And that's a wasted vote. Anytime you vote for someone that you know not only does not share your goals, but is actively working against them, you are wasting your vote. I've heard it said that people like me think I would make the best governor, but in this race, they're going to have to vote for the lesser of two evils. Well, I don't know which one they're talking about, which one they're picking, but I say all it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to vote for the lesser of two evils. That's exactly what got us in this shape. If we had started 10 years ago just voting for who we thought was right and who was best for the job, we wouldn't be in this dilemma. We were constantly voting for what we think is the lesser of two evils. But I don't know who's the lesser of two evils among the two top guys. I think maybe it's Bill White, because he at least would be ineffective. He would have a conservative Republican legislature to deal with. They would grow a backbone and oppose him. We've seen that happen when you have divided government. Would not roll over for him like they do for Rick Perry. So if that's your objective, then I don't know they're choosing the right lesser of two evils. I also heard people say, well, we're going to vote for a guy we don't like and don't want, and then we're going to hold his feet to the fire. Well, how is that for a way of picking your government? And how's it been working for you for the last 10 years? Where have all you feet fire holders been? And do you really want a governor that you have to watch like a 3-year-old boy around a book of matches? No. Vote for somebody that you don't have to watch, because you know that they're going to be working for the things you prize, things you want. Because if any party thinks they've got you in their hip pocket, you're going to be set upon. Oh, you can vote and give Rick Perry everything he wants on November 2nd, but the morning of November 3rd, he still won't respect you. We're coming down to the last of this race, and best showing I've had in any poll I've seen is at 8%, but that was before the debate where I got some rave reviews. So I think I may be in double digits now, and who knows what can happen. Things can be surprising. But even if I don't win, I'll never be sorry that I did this, because I'm doing what I can do to defend my country and my state. And I ask everybody, just think what your one vote means. It's important to you how it's interpreted, the message you send. If you vote for the status quo, then that's what you'll get. You'll get what you got for the last 10 years, or maybe worse, because if the incumbent gets back in office and he's not going to run again, he will not have the problem of voter opinion to hold him back. We will see Rick Perry unleashed and untethered. And I don't think we're going to like what we see. It'll be, hello Gardasil, hello Trans-Texas Corridor, goodbye sovereignty. But a vote for Kathy Glass, even if I don't win, if I just make a good showing, well, that's a vote for change, and change in the right direction. Change in the direction of limited government, constitutional government. And if the numbers are big enough, I say every vote is an arrow in my quiver. Because you want to see somebody hold somebody's feet to the fire? I'm the one. But you got to give me clout in the form of votes. A good, respectable showing. As they say, after this election, if we see that Trans-Texas Corridor coming back and we see that border continuing to deteriorate, I can call them out. And I have some clout if I've had a good showing in the polls. Kathy Glass gets 2 or 3%, maybe they won't care so much what I have to say. But Kathy Glass gets 15 or 20, 25%, they'll care. And that way I can continue to fight this fight, because I'm not going away. And I know you're not either, because I say to the people of the Texas and all Americans in the world, never retreat, never surrender. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ed Mishu, Libertarian candidate for the 27th District, U.S. House of Representatives. Mr. Mishu.
Thanks, Dennis. Little feedback here. As he said, I'm Ed Mishu. I'm the third candidate for this congressional district. Tell you a little bit about myself and where I'm coming from. I got into this race, really started 2 years ago, and I got into it because I was concerned about the direction this country was going, and our existing Congress was taking us downhill very rapidly. I started out just trying to be a person to get people involved, get them talking. Cameron County particularly is politically pretty apathetic. And I was trying to get people to wake up, get involved, and out of that, we would have a candidate rise up and take the lead that we could support. Well, I probably underestimated the apathy because we didn't get a candidate rise up. But in all my stirring of the pot, Mr. Fred Drew, who is the chairman of the Libertarian Party down here, said, "You're the man that's going to run." Well, it took several months and a lot of consulting with my wife, talking to other people around the district before I agreed to accept the nomination, and that's why I'm here now. Mr. Solomon Ortiz, our incumbent, has forgotten what his job is. He's been there 28 years. He listens more to special interest and party leadership than he does to you, the constituents of the 27th District. He gives you a lot. He says he gives you a lot. He takes credit for more than he really does. And there are people who down here who want to be in a nanny state, and they're going to vote to keep him in there. But those numbers are going downhill rapidly as people become more and more concerned. Now, I've got a Republican competitor in this race also. When he was asked by the League of Women Voters in Corpus Christi to write out his description of his qualifications for the job, for a voter guide they were publishing this month, and these are his words. He's over 25 years old, he's a U.S. citizen, and he's a resident of Texas. That's the sum of his qualifications and experience for this job. And those were his words, not mine. Now, he is also, he'll tell you, he is a lawyer, but he got tired of being a lawyer and quit, practicing law after a little while. And that kind of shows a little bit of his background and character, because he was a trust fund baby and has never had to work a day in his life and lacks a sense of commitment to what he's doing. And then you got this guy. I'm not a politician. I've never been a politician. I have no interest in becoming a career politician. I'm a combat decorated Air Force colonel, retired. I then went to work in the private sector, worked for a Fortune 500 company, and ended up as an executive in that company. And I have a master's degree in management. My pledge is to work for you, not for any special interest and not for party leadership. When I go to Washington, they only know 3 letters in Washington: R, D, and I. I'm not up there as a libertarian. I'm not up there as a Constitutionalist Party member. I'm up there as an independent from the Libertarian Party, but I'm independent. And I'm contending we need much more independence in Washington. We need to branch out so that we have a break in this gridlock we've got in Congress. I was very fortunate in that I've been endorsed by the National Liberty Candidate Organization. That endorsement was given because they recognize my stance and position on the liberties of people, on constitutional government, on sound money, on free market principles, and a rational national foreign policy. I'm very proud of those. And I will support all of those steps when I'm in Washington. I'm for much smaller government. It has gone way too far, too fast, and for every new job in the government sector, it's taking away the resources that should be dedicated in the private sector for private sector jobs. Those government sector people do not create money, wealth, prosperity for this country. They don't create jobs for this country. All they do is add to the bureaucratic maze and the overregulation that people are being forced to see. I'm for severely cutting back on spending. We have to have a sound fiscal responsibility in Congress that is created by spending cuts, not by increased taxation of the people. Thank you. There are a few things in the way of congressional operations that I will absolutely support. One is the Enumerated Powers Act that has been brought up to Congress every year, I think, for about the last 8 sessions of Congress, and it doesn't get out of committee to be voted on the floor. I will co-sponsor that when it is reinitiated next year, and it will be reinitiated, and I'll be glad to sign on for a co-sponsor. Now, what that means, if you aren't familiar with it, it means that every piece of legislation that is presented in Congress must have a constitutional thread. How is this justified in our Constitution? And if it's not, you can't process that legislation. I'm for much smaller bills, no more bundling lots of things all into one big bill, because it becomes comprehensive and incomprehensible. So let's have legislation that addresses one problem at a time, so it's clear, it's understood, and it's well defined. I'm for term limits, but practically speaking, we're not going to get an amendment for term limits out of Congress because we're hitting them right where most of them live. So I'm in favor of more people activity to enforce term limits through the ballot box. That's the best way to do it. Another thing that I am for, and I know it's probably not, realistic to suggest it, but I think in the area of fiscal responsibility and getting our house back in order, Congress should set an example. They should set an example by saying no more congressional raises if the last year was a deficit year. The only way Congress can get a raise in their salary is if they have a balanced budget and they perform to a balanced budget, and then that raise is limited to the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. A lot of you are, and like myself, are in Social Security. We're not getting a raise in Social Security again because it's tied to the CPI. The CPI is not a realistic indicator of the cost of living. All of you that go to the store to buy groceries know that cost of living is way up, but the CPI is way down. If we tie salaries to CPI, maybe they'll straighten that out. So. Yes. So that's really where I'm coming from, folks. I would appreciate you considering me for a vote. If you don't know enough about me, please look up my website, edmishu.com, and learn more and ask questions. And I know that new congressmen are said to be looking at #1 re-election when they go in there. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to look at discharging my congressional responsibilities to the best of my ability. And if I do that well, re-election will take care of itself. And if I don't do that well, I wouldn't ask you to re-elect me anyway. Thank you very much.
It's an extreme honor for me. This is Mr. Larry Pratt from Gunowners America, the Executive Vice President, and a very good speaker. Please pay attention.
Thank you. Dennis, thank you so much for putting this together, for inviting me down here. I'd like to, shame the media is not still here, because I like to say something that kind of makes their head explode. We were at an armed rally on April 19, which the media thinks is Timothy McVeigh Day. Actually, since they're all graduates of government schools, they're not likely to know that that's the day that most Americans recognize was the beginning of our War of Independence at Lexington and Concord. And the idea of a bunch of men running around like many of you are with guns is very troubling to the ruling class. Well, it was troubling to George III also. We had the rally, and I was given the honor of speaking to the group, and I pointed out something I want to say today. We are in a war. And the other side knows that we're in a war. I'm not sure, maybe our side is beginning to come to an awareness of the fact that we're in a war, but they started the war, and this war is total. They want our guns, obviously, as did George III when he banned the importation of guns and ammo and other things of the sort. They want our money, clearly. Their only solution to a problem is to raise taxes. They want our land. There's increasing regulation and restriction on what we can do with our land. They want our kids. They don't want us to have any input whatsoever in their education. And basically, they want everything we have. You can't even start a business in this country without asking for some bureaucrat for permission. And it strikes me that it's a little odd that since they're our employees and we're the sovereign, we the people have established this government and we're the boss, but they don't look at it that way. Hopefully they're going to get their first lesson in what I think is a decade-long fight to restore the republic. We're not, even if we like the direction of many of the elections that occur this Tuesday coming, we're not going to be able to get at all of them that need to be gotten at, and there's going to be some that are going to forget, even if they knew when they went in, and we're going to have to go deal with them all over again. This is something that's going to require us to be vigilant for a long, long time, because that's what it's going to take to restore our republic. The idea that we have to ask for a bureaucrat's permission, or perhaps some elected official permission, a court judge or a sheriff, before we can carry a concealed firearm. And in a state like Texas, where we can't even carry a handgun openly, has to be concealed with their permission certificate. That's outrageous. The gun's to protect my life. They tell us, well, we got to keep guns from falling into the wrong hands. Well, where's that ever worked? District of Columbia had a gun ban. England has an almost total gun ban. They got gun bans in lots of places of the world. Have they licked crime? Last time I checked, where you have gun bans, you have more violent crime than where people are at least to some extent able to carry guns. And Vermont and Alaska and now Arizona require no permit whatsoever. you're able to carry openly or concealed anytime you want. That's the way to go. I really think that even as a gun issue, education needs to be on our agenda, because that's where there's so much brainwashing of kids. I was in the airport yesterday, and I was listening to a couple of 30-year-old, I think they were sisters, and one of the flight was coming down here, and then right next to it was like gate A and gate B, was going to Guadalajara. And this one lady said, "Is that in the United States?" Really? Somebody 30 years old doesn't even know where Guadalajara is? Living in this part of the country? I think that's pretty astounding. Naturally, they don't know what the First Amendment says. When Christine O'Donnell was challenged on that by Wolf Blitzer of CNN, and he said, American voters want to know. Her proper answer would have been right then to say, Wolf Blitzer, you don't know what American voters want to know, otherwise you'd have somebody looking at your program. But you don't have any ratings. Anyway, he asked her about something that got into the First Amendment, and she made the point that the separation of church and state is not in the First Amendment. The law students groaned because they know it's in the First Amendment. I'll tell you what, I have yet to talk to a lawyer who says that he ever read the Constitution when he took constitutional law. And that's why they didn't understand what Christine O'Donnell was saying. That's how bad it is in the schools. Well, if we don't know the First Amendment, guess what? We don't know what the Second Amendment is either. And they'll still be propounding in those classrooms that it's some sort of a collective right and that people can't be trusted with guns. Forget that the Supreme Court has sort of kind of started on a recognition that it's an individual right. That's not what's going to come down in the classrooms. And so when these kids come out to vote, not only will they not know where Guadalajara is, they're not going to know what their rights are. They'll think that their rights are right to a free meal, a free house, free medicine. Those are their rights, not the right to be free and to have the government limited to protecting that freedom. That's what it's supposed to do and nothing more. Well, we're going to see what happens in this new Congress. I know that the head of the Second Amendment caucus in the House is Representative Paul Brown from Athens, Georgia. And we were talking a few months ago, and he said, you know, if my party regains control of the House, I think I might just introduce a bill to repeal the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Now, that's something we need to get a vote on. That would be win, lose, or draw. A recorded vote would then give us a very important tool for the forthcoming elections. And hopefully we're going to see a lot of other bills to repeal a lot of other agencies in Washington, because it's hard to find any of them that fit within the 18 enumerated powers in Article 1, Section 8. And certainly gun control is not there. So any piece of federal gun law that they want to repeal is just fine with me. Not only do they not work, they certainly are not constitutional. Now, one of the things that I have been very encouraged about is the growth of willingness of states to interpose themselves between Washington and their own folks. The last time this was really tried in a significant way was in the run-up to the War of Lincoln's Aggression. And in the North, I think it's correct to say all of the states passed legislation saying that it would be illegal to enforce the fugitive slave law, which in fact was not constitutional, in spite of what the Supreme Court had said, in their state. And so when, in one case was very interesting, a fugitive slave had been apprehended by a federal marshal. In the good old days, we didn't have federal jails. He was in a local jail, and that was violating the law, and that incensed, because that's specifically what was prohibited by the law. So a newspaper editor, not even having time to print a newspaper, went out and caused an alarm and got people riled up and aware of what was going on. They went into the jail and freed the slave, and that led to 2 series of litigation for state and federal laws that supposedly had been violated. The end of the matter was when they finally got him convicted on the fugitive slave law in the second go-around, there was a writ of habeas corpus issued by the state Supreme Court, making sure that the newspaper editor didn't serve any time in the jail. And that was the end of the matter. So it doesn't matter what the Supreme Court says, because they're not the supreme law of the land. You and I, as voters, are the supreme law of the land. We, the people. And that's the way we're supposed to resolve a constitutional issue, in the ballot box. And so when states began to get a little uppity lately, it, as far as I can tell, started with the Real ID Act, which would have made a national ID card out of our driver's licenses. When 12 states, maybe more now, enacted legislation saying, we'll put our bureaucrats in jail if they even think about sending that data that might be put on that card to Washington. As a result, it's been over 4 years now, and the feds have not invoked the sanctions that they might have, which of main concern perhaps to most of us would be, couldn't buy a gun with a driver's license, couldn't get on a plane with a driver's license from that state, whatever state it might have been. And the feds have just said, okay, never mind. So there's obviously a strength in numbers. Well, that gets interesting because already 8 states have enacted a Firearms Freedom Act. If the gun is made in the state, identified as such, and stays in the state, no federal firearms laws apply. Now, Wyoming has an interesting twist in theirs. It's the same as the other states, but it also says that if a Fed tries to impose federal law in contravention of state law, that's an offense that could get him 365 days in jail. If they had made it one more day, a conviction, even if he never served a day, but the conviction would have taken away his gun rights under federal law. Now, the feds are probably not going to like that. They're going to try to, the way they did with Lon Horiuchi, the murderer from of Randy Weaver's family out in Idaho at Ruby Ridge. They'll try to move it to federal court. The point is, if that federale comes back into Wyoming after he's been convicted, that's another offense under state law there too. It's going to be tough to be a federal thug with states doing things like that. There ought to be a law. Yeah, it's called the Constitution. So what Gunowners of America is going to be doing, the NRA doesn't want to support these laws. They've told legislators we don't support it. They didn't say they opposed it either. They just don't want to get behind it. But we're going to be asking legislators to have a Wyoming +1 type of provision. And if we get a dozen states or more that enact that kind of legislation, you know what? I think it's going to be harder and harder to enforce federal gun laws. That's the idea, of course. There's another approach that can also be taken. Virginia is one of the states that said no to Obamacare. Now, one of its provisions says that if you are being harassed by the feds and they try to get a lien on your property, no Virginia sheriff under that law is able to place that lien on your property. And I was talking to the legislator that got that through, and I said, that's all well and good, but what about my money or my company's money that's in a bank account? All they have to do is go online, clickety-clack, and there goes my money. Real easy. He said, well, there's an answer to that. I've got a bill this year. I'll have it again next year to have a state bank outside the federal system, just like North Dakota. And when your money's there, there's not a thing the federales can do because they have no jurisdiction. You know, it's really kind of exciting to see that there are, especially at the state level, legislators who are looking for ways to kick Uncle Sam right in the knee. I mean, well, somebody said maybe higher, but I didn't, you know, we're in polite company, so let's not go there. As long as we stop them, it doesn't matter where we kick them. We can agree on that. Now, so these are some of the things that we're going to be working on at Gunowners of America, and I guess just as a wrap, I'd like to explain what our philosophy is of lobbying, and what our philosophy is in federal elections, that is primarily what we get involved in to the extent that we have resources. And that is, we don't think the system as it is should be respected. It's an illegitimate system that's way outside the bounds of the federal Constitution. And the NRA and a lot of other groups, so it's not just the NRA, look at the system as a given, that we can't change it, so we just have to have access to it so we can be a player. You're probably familiar with the biblical account of when Christ went into the temple and he made a cat of nine tails and drove out the money changers because what they were doing was illegitimate. The standard lobbying approach in Washington would be to say, hey, you didn't let me know this was going on. I need a place at this table. And if he'd have been mad at him at all, it was because they owed him some back part of the cut. Now, we think the table is filled with ill-gotten items and it needs to be overturned just as it was in the temple that day. And we hope that we're going to have enough folks with cat of nine tails that they're either going to clear off the table and reset it constitutionally, or we're going to reset them. And when we, so that's really the difference. Whether you are whether you're suffering from the Stockholm syndrome and assume that the best way to survive this kidnapping is to go along with whatever my captor wants to do. You may remember Patty Hearst was kidnapped decades ago, and she ended up robbing banks with her kidnappers. She had so fallen into the Stockholm syndrome, and I guess psychologically it may be understandable. It's a survival technique in the short run. But when you think that way in politics, you end up perpetuating the system, which is killing us. It's strangling us. It's enslaving us. So hopefully the message this fall is going to be, Congress, you're fired. And hopefully if they don't get it, those that manage to get elected, we'll do the same to them next go around until they finally understand that we the people are the boss. We're going to carry a gun wherever we want, even on a school. Perish that thought. Why, we might even be able to shoot a Muslim terrorist that wants to do something like was done over in Russia, where about 300 people, including about half of them kids, were murdered because nobody had a gun. All the guns were on the outside. That didn't do much good. We got to be able to defend ourselves at any time. That's why we need to be able to carry a gun at any time. And if somebody wants to carry it openly and some socialist ruling class wets their pants, that's okay. We'll get them a depends. But let's just not succumb to that way of thinking. The watchword is Constitution, is individual liberty, including markets, including carrying guns. And an armed people are much more likely, as George III found out, going to be able to protect those freedoms than a disarmed people. So thanks for coming here with your guns today.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd now like to introduce Mr. Jon Roland, Libertarian candidate for State's Attorney General of Texas.
Good afternoon. I am the Libertarian nominee for Texas Attorney General. And to understand why I'm seeking that office, it's important to understand what the office of the Attorney General can do and what it cannot do. The Attorney General cannot do all the things that a lot of people think it should be able to do or would like it to do. I get a lot of people calling upon my positions on what are essentially legislative issues. The Attorney General doesn't get to pass on legislation. All he gets to do is enforce it. However, how he enforces it can make all the difference in the world. For example, there is a statute that requires the state, the Attorney General essentially, to represent whistleblowers, as well as perhaps their agencies if the whistleblower is suing the agency. Now you may ask, how can the Attorney General come in on both sides of an issue? And the answer is, he can. One of the jobs of the Attorney General is to make sure that all of the key arguments are well represented. It's not up to him to try to weigh the scales of justice or to try to talk to the judge in chambers and get him to, decide the case one way or another. His job is to present the best arguments for all the positions on which a decision is needed. And that would include the whistleblowers, of which there's been several who have not been represented. But one of the things that the Attorney General can do that he very seldom does is to open up a grand jury to complaints from citizens. It would be right now, local district attorneys pretty well serve as the gatekeeper for grand juries. They stand in the way of any citizen trying to bring a complaint to it. And very often those complaints are about official misconduct. So one of the things that I would do as Attorney General, because I cannot, as the current law says, actually initiate a criminal case against a local public official. The DA is charged with doing that. But what I can do is to open the grand jury to a complaint from a citizen and then arrange to get a special prosecutor appointed, which of course could be someone from the AG's office. Now, that might require going all the way up to the Texas Supreme Court to bypass the opposition that would undoubtedly develop in lower courts, especially if the grand jury is investigating misconduct on the part of perhaps the judges themselves or their cronies. There's a lot of official misconduct. It is a serious problem. Most official corruption begins at the local level. Local government is the incubator of public corruption, from which it spreads to the state level and then to the federal level. The local level is a level at which it needs to be nipped in the bud. But all too often people are derelict in their duty to supervise their local officials. They think it's okay to put out a request for proposals for some public expenditure for which only one candidate can qualify. Probably the friend of some public official, maybe his brother-in-law or something of that sort. One issue that comes up a lot in this part of Texas is discrimination against minorities. Well, I've examined how this process unfolds, and it is not so much discrimination against minorities as against non-cronies. It's discrimination for cronies. And if minorities are not cronies, they're going to feel discriminated against. I once had, for example, a software package for local government. I couldn't give it away. People wouldn't take it for free because they wanted the money to go to somebody's brother-in-law, literally in one case. So that's the kind of thing the Attorney General has to be prepared to investigate. He has general supervisory authority over county and municipal government, as do grand juries. But grand juries are kept so busy with indictments. In Harris County, they barely have 10 minutes to consider each indictment, that they don't have the opportunity to examine anything else. So one of the things I would be pushing for is to have grand juries set aside a certain amount of their time to supervise public administration. Now, changing the subject, we had a discussion earlier about nullification and my proposal for a nullification commission, a kind of super grand jury which would hear complaints from citizens about misconduct by federal officials. And if it found that the federal official had violated the Constitution, it would trigger non-cooperation by the entire state. Every state official, every agent, every contractor, and he would urge citizens to also refuse to cooperate. Now, I pointed out that one of the problems with other proposals for nullification is that they really don't understand the legal processes involved. It was mentioned earlier about the problem of removal to federal court of any attempt by a state to impose criminal penalties on a federal agent. This does not occur after the state trial has taken place. The removal will most likely take place within an hour of him being arrested, before he's even arraigned. That immediately stops all state action. The state is stopped in its tracks. The federal court takes it over and will probably dismiss it within a day. So there is no opportunity to arrest federal officials as a way to try to get the federal government to stop usurping the Constitution. We have to be more creative, and that mostly consists of non-cooperation, civil disobedience, and sometimes that has to be done in very clever ways, because in many cases the federal government does not need our cooperation. Our incumbent Attorney General joined 19 other state Attorney Generals in a suit filed by the Attorney General of Florida against the Health Care Act. The suit was drafted by a friend, David Rifkin, for the bill as it had existed before it was finally voted on. It was expected that there would be the power of the IRS to apply levies and liens to collect these insurance mandates. Well, Congress anticipated that and specifically removed from the IRS the authority to levy or lien to collect those insurance mandates. The money can still be collected because there are other ways the federal government can get a hold of your money, but when you try to get the money back, which is the only thing that the law allows currently, you'll discover that they're going to go after you for a deficiency on not on the insurance mandate, but on other taxes, and will probably levy all kinds of interest penalties and so forth, running up your bill to a huge amount, which under the law you have to pay first before you can sue to get your money back. And the amount in question is only probably going to be about $800. So, the health care bill is an excellent example of what I mean by government by indirection. It is very cleverly designed to force employers out of the business of providing health care insurance for their employees and insurance companies out of the business of selling health insurance. After a few years, we will discover that there is no funding available for medical care except the federal government. Now, I don't know how many of the proponents of the health care bill understand how this will work. I'm sure a few of them do. But the key is that if you don't understand the secondary, tertiary, quaternary effects of how things are going to unfold down the line in the chain of causation, you're not going to know how to intervene to prevent it. The Attorney General has to be able to make good decisions about the way he litigates. When he signed on to that Florida litigation, he was signing on to a defective suit. And his opponent, the Democratic opponent, rightly labeled it a loser suit. And it is. The only trouble is she has loser suits of her own. She wants to sue Wall Street. Well, most of what she wants to do is also legally defective. Neither one of my opponents really understands the law well enough to know how to conduct a well thought out lawsuit. And I'm not even a lawyer. I'm a legal historian. But I've been up against my Republican opponent in court, and you can review the litigation yourself and ask yourself who in that courtroom, who among the parties understood the legal issues. So if you haven't voted already, or if you have friends who haven't voted already, I ask you to vote, cast a vote for Jon Roland as Libertarian for Attorney General. Remember, when you cast a vote, what you're doing is influencing public policy. A vote for one of the two major parties is very unlikely to have any effect on public policy, regardless of the outcome. It's not going to determine the outcome. The odds of a single vote affecting the outcome are infinitesimal. But if we could get 8, 10, 15% or more for the Libertarian candidate, the two major parties would be falling over each other to try to become more libertarian. Now, whether they would be sincere in that remains to be seen, but at least it would shift the whole direction of public discourse. And I would rather have people arguing about how best to be libertarian than about how best to be socialist. So thank you for hearing me today. If you have any further questions, I have handouts in back there on my nullification proposal and my website, one main website for the candidacy, JONROLAND.org. And if you're interested in what else I've been up to, if you go to JONROLAND.net, you can see the site I prepared for a run for the U.S. Senate. And if you want to see what a repeal of all federal gun control legislation would look like, you can find a bill, which I've already drafted, that would do that. No one has ever tried to introduce a bill like that before. 2 years from now, if I run for the U.S. Senate and get elected, that's one of the first bills that I would introduce. But in the meantime, it's very important for people like you to know what a bill like that would look like. Because you need to be hitting your members of Congress and saying, hey, I found this bill over here to repeal all gun control legislation. Why haven't you introduced it? Okay, thank you.